Hi everyone, my name's Chris and I'm an alcoholic. Tonight we're looking at step 12 and it's the last one in the series. So I hope you enjoy this one. We're not gurus. We don't know everything. We recommend that you read the AA literature yourself, especially the big book. See how it matches up with your own experience and discuss what you hear in the workshop with other members and your sponsor. The workshops are about giving you an overview of the 12 steps. I'm just going to pass it straight over to David because there is a lot to cover tonight.
Hi, my name's David, I'm an alcoholic, and it's good to be talking about my favourite step because this is great, this one, step 12. We've been talking over the last few weeks in this series about the 12-step program and reading from the big book and based on everything that's out of the AA big book. And tonight's the same. Everything that we read out and talk about is based on what's in the AA big book. But just to quickly go through to get how do we get to step 12, I came into AA, I'd been drinking for 17 years, and the last 3 of those years I was trying to stop drinking and I'd failed and I ended up losing lots of stuff and I ended up in AA. And the first thing I identified with is when people talked about the physical craving, the basis of this illness is a physical difference between me and other people. Most people who drink can get to a point where they can say, no thanks, I've had enough. Whereas whenever I started drinking, it set off this craving and I had to keep on going and keep on going. Now, of course, the solution to that is stop drinking. But then I found out and identified when other people talked about this other aspect, this mental obsession. So even though I really wanted to stop, and I would stop for periods of time, the memory, the urge to do it was still there. And eventually I'd do the insane thing of pick up again. And when I did that, it sets off the craving again, goes out of control. And so I pretty readily agreed that I was powerless over alcohol. You put those two things together. I can't afford to drink because when I do it, I can't control it. And I can't stop and stay stopped on my own. And so step 1 is this one. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives have become unmanageable. And so step 1 is really simply admitting that this is true for me. Now, the thing about step 1 is that there's no hope in step 1. Step 1 doesn't fix my problem. That's just the realisation that I've got a problem that I can't fix. But then I met people in AA and I started listening to alcoholics in AA who said they had recovered. They were actually saying that they had been restored to sanity with regard to alcohol. I got this hope. And so that leads me to step 2. If I'm powerless over alcohol, step 2 suggests that we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Where's the evidence of that? People in AA who've recovered from the same disease that I suffer from. And that then leads me into step 3, where I make a decision. I know I'm powerless. I've now got hope that this spiritual program might work, and I make a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. Now, I don't know how to live a spiritual life, so to me this is a decision to go on with the process. Go on and do those things that those other members did in order to start living that spiritual life. And so there's middle steps, often known as the house cleaning steps. It starts with taking inventory and sharing it with someone else. So steps 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. And steps 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. I now know what needs to change, what's standing in the way of me living a sober spiritual life. And so it's about me becoming ready to change and praying for help. So step 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. And step 7, humbly asked Him to remove our shortcomings. The next part is then about cleaning up the past. So looking for the harm we've done to other people and making amends. And so we have step 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. And then step 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. And so they're these house cleaning steps, and then I come to step 10, and when I read the book, it actually tells me by the time I get to step 10, sanity has been returned. There's the fulfillment of the promise from step 2. Step 2 promised that I could be restored to sanity. By step 10, that's come about, and I've been restored to sanity. I'm no longer picking up a drink. It sort of talks about we recoil as from a hot flame. We're neither fighting it, and we feel in this position safe and protected. And now I can start living in the solution. Now that I've reached this point of sanity, of recovery, I need to do some stuff to stay there. There's this continuing inventory in step 10. Continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. and then some prayer and meditation to keep me in contact with that higher power. So step 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. So that's where we got to last week, looking at those ones, okay? By this point, I've started to live by some spiritual principles. And an amazing thing has happened. I love this quote. It's actually from page 132 of the Big Book.
We have recovered and have been given the power to help others.
I come into AA powerless over alcohol. I'm still powerless over alcohol. I can't stop and stay stopped on my own, but it has given me a power, and it's a superpower. It's the power to help another alcoholic. And that's what we're mainly going to be talking about tonight when we're talking about step 12, helping others and carrying the message. So step 12, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. There's a whole chapter just for this one step, so it's a pretty important step, chapter 7. And we're going to be going through the first few pages of this chapter because it's got a lot of really great information and some detailed instructions about how we go about working with others, how we go about carrying the message. Starts with this.
Practical experience shows that nothing will so much ensure immunity from drinking as intensive work with other alcoholics. It works when other activities fail. This is our 12th suggestion. Carry this message to other alcoholics. You can help when no one else can. You can secure their confidence when others fail. Remember, they are very ill. Life will take on new meaning. To watch people recover, to see them help others, to watch loneliness vanish, to see a fellowship grow up about you, to have a host of friends. This is an experience you must not miss. We know you will not want to miss it. Frequent contact with newcomers and with each other is the bright spot of our lives.
This is pointing out that the 12th step is actually the most powerful step of all. It works when all else fails. So it's really important to me. In fact, it's so powerful. I just want to tell you a little story about how I actually saw this step physically change someone. And I'm talking about Chris. Lots of you will have heard Chris's story and how she got sober. And when she was 14 months sober, her oldest 2 daughters were killed in a car accident. And obviously this is a really traumatic event for all of us. And I can remember the day of the funeral. And we were in Melbourne and we were preparing to drive up to Bendigo to go to the funeral. And you can imagine how we felt and how Chris felt that day, getting ready to drive up to go to the funeral. And she carried herself in that way with a heavy heart. And just before we left, Chris got a phone call. And it was a lady with a drinking problem looking for help from a member of AA. And I can remember watching Chris take that phone call. And she took the call and her shoulders went back and thought, I know how to help this lady. Okay. And the person on the other end of the phone had no idea what was happening in our lives that day, but Chris was able to lift her head and give this person hope and share her story of recovery. And it was amazing. And that's the way Chris carried herself for the rest of the day. So that's how powerful this is. Getting out of myself to try and help someone else. And through the years, we've learnt this over and over again. Through all the trials and ups and downs and triumphs of sobriety, the thing that keeps me connected, the thing that's going to keep me on track to stay sober is looking for these opportunities to help the next person. Powerful, powerful thing. Also, there's a huge amount of joy in actually carrying this message. We were fortunate soon after that. We were in Melbourne and a friend of mine was on a committee trying to help organise rosters to go into hospitals. And he was a pretty good salesman, actually. And he went and contacted half a dozen hospitals and said, oh, you need some AA members coming in and talking to your patients in your drug and alcohol section. And he was such a good salesman, they all said yes. And so all of a sudden, he's saying, I've got to organise rosters. And on the Monday night, we're going to go to this detox. And the Tuesday night, this one. On Wednesday night, we're going to go to this hospital. And Thursday night, we're going to go to this. And so ended up, Chris and I were going almost every night of the week, going into these detoxes and hospitals. and talking to the patients and learning how to do step 12. And in between that, we're going to as many meetings as we could find to try and recruit people to get on the rosters. And it was an amazing few months of actually doing this over and over again. And a really joyful thing. One of the greatest joys for me is actually taking a newer member. My home group, my old home group used to go into a detox, still does, goes into a detox every week. And you've got a new member who's feeling a bit, don't know what I'm going to say, whatever. And you go in there for the first time and you just say, tell your story, and they tell you the story and they get a connection with another alcoholic. And so many times the person's come out and gone, wow, that was awesome. Can we come back to the detox next week? And you go, oh, actually, it's a roster. You'll probably get another chance in 6 weeks' time. But, you know, that's a great joy for me, introducing other people to this 12-step work. This chapter, it's a really great chapter. It was recommended that I read it over and over again. We're going to just divide it into some sections, just as a way of looking at these things. We're going to divide this into the 12 steps, the 12 steps of 12th stepping, just to give us some guidance about how the book suggests that we do this. So the first thing I need to do is actually find someone who wants to stop drinking. This is what the book says.
Perhaps you are not acquainted with any drinkers who want to recover. You can easily find some by asking a few doctors, ministers, priests, or hospitals. They will be only too glad to assist you. Don't start out as an evangelist or a reformer. Unfortunately, a lot of prejudice exists. You will be handicapped if you arouse it. Ministers and doctors are competent, and you can learn much from them if you wish. But it happens that because of our own drinking experience, you can be uniquely useful to other alcoholics. So cooperate, never criticise. To be helpful is our only aim.
I was fortunate when I first got sober. I was in Bendigo and my sponsor was actually on the telephone service there, and people would ring up looking for help from AA. And I'd actually get to go and visit people in their homes. This whole chapter is written as if we're actually going to visit someone in their home or in their hospital bed, and gives us a description on how to do that. But I think it also applies to lots of other circumstances as well. The same principles. He would ring me up and say, I've got someone to go and see. I'll come around and pick you up and we'll both go to visit this person in their home. And what he'd say to me is, reread chapter 7 before I get there, just to get it clear in your mind what the message is that you're carrying. Now, because this is so important, I think I have to always put myself in a situation where I'm meeting new people to carry the message to. Step 12 is not about sitting back waiting for people to show up at AA. I need to go places to carry the message to people who haven't yet heard it. So that's why I make sure that I'm on the roster. That's not every single week, but I make sure I'm on the local roster to go and visit the detox or the hospital or the prison if there's one nearby. Or that I volunteer on a telephone answering service. Again, I used to do this as well before, and I still do. Before I go and visit a hospital or detox, I reread this chapter to make sure I'm clear. And even when I was on the telephones, I'd do a whole morning or whatever on the telephones. It'd be re-diverted to me. At the first half hour or a few minutes of that while I'm waiting for a call, I would reread chapter 7 because it's so important and so clearly describes what I need to do. Of course, there's other opportunities. There's also the opportunity of carrying the message in meetings or talking to newcomers before or after the meetings. Also in sponsoring, I use these same principles out of this chapter when I'm sponsoring someone. The first time we meet together, I go through this process as described in chapter 7 of the big book. And also occasionally when we get the opportunities to do public information, similar principles are in place about how I'm carrying the message and what the message is that I'm carrying. So there's lots of opportunities. The next thing in our 12 steps is work out the best approach. This is what the big book says.
If he does not want to stop drinking, don't waste time trying to persuade him. You may spoil a later opportunity.
This is an important thing. AA, we're not particularly good at convincing people they need to stop drinking. Alcohol does that, okay? And AA is for people who have decided that they want to stop. Sometimes you get a call from someone, and it's happened to my sponsor. He got a phone call and he thought that the alcoholic was asking for help, but it wasn't. It was the alcoholic's wife. And he showed up and knocked on the door, and the wife answered the door and yelled out to the guy having a drink and sitting on the couch watching telly, saying, "There's a guy here from AA here to tell you to stop drinking." And the guy jumped up and ran out the back, jumped the fence and ran away. John was able to catch up with him a bit later on and apologise to him. "I shouldn't have been there. I just want to be helpful." You've got to keep that friendly thing going. This is a painting of one of the first 12-step calls, Dr. Bob and Bill, when they went to visit the man in the bed, the third AA member, Bill D. So we can ask that question, is the person ready? If not, we just be friendly. We don't throw them away, just try to be friendly and say, if you ever think you might have a problem, AA's around, but we don't push it any further. So stop here if the person doesn't want to stop drinking. Just be friendly, be a friendly face, so that eventually down the track, if they do decide they need AA, they'll go, "Oh, I met that friendly guy," okay? But he wasn't pushy. Okay? It's actually the right thing to stop here. It's the wrong thing to continue on, because you might do some damage.
Sometimes it is wise to wait till he goes on a binge. The family may object to this, but unless he is in a dangerous physical condition, it is better to risk it. Don't deal with him when he is very drunk, unless he is ugly and the family needs your help. Wait for the end of the spree, or at least for a lucid interval. Then let his family or a friend ask him if he wants to quit for good, and if he would, go to any extreme to do so. If he says yes, then his attention should be drawn to you as a person who has recovered.
This is really great advice. If you get the family saying, "Can you come and convince dad or mum or whatever to stop drinking?" Sometimes you have to suggest this, okay? Just wait. Here's my phone number. Maybe here's a pamphlet or some information about AA. Wait until that Monday morning when the person is hungover and apologising for what happened on the weekend. I know what that's like because it happened to me, right? Monday morning, and I'm all so sorry and apologising to the wife or whatever, and I'll never do it again. And then, of course, I'm an alcoholic by 4 o'clock. That's all out the window. You know, I've forgotten about that. I've started again. It's at that moment in the morning, right? It's that moment when the alcoholic is feeling sad and sorry for themselves and all apologetic. That's the moment where the family can say, "Are you ready to do something about it? Here's a phone number of someone I know. Call this person right now."
And we can be helpful to the families to suggest that.
It goes on.
If your man needs hospitalisation, he should have it, but not forcibly unless he is violent.
Another thing to remember, that my initial problem when I want to stop drinking is actually a medical one. I need to detox. And depending on how long I've been drinking and how much I've been drinking, that can actually be quite dangerous. In AA, we're not doctors, okay? The first thing I think in a lot of cases we need to be saying to someone is talk to your doctor. Do you want to stop drinking? First of all, particularly if someone can't stop drinking for a day or 2 or 3. In the end, I couldn't do that. I couldn't stop for even a day or 2 unless I got medical help. So my initial problem is really a medical one, is to get through that detox. And we should be passing that on.
Call on him while he is still jittery. He may be more receptive when depressed.
Okay, that's that point, isn't it? It's that moment in time that it's fleeting actually for an alcoholic.
It is fleeting, yes.
So next thing, okay, we've got this person, they've indicated they want to stop drinking or may want to stop drinking. Then we get acquainted. This is what it says.
See your man alone if possible. At first, engage in general conversation. After a while, turn the talk to some phase of drinking.
So it's about being friendly to someone, being a friendly face. And then we start talking about what? About our own drinking, not their drinking. We start talking about our own drinking. You start telling your story and then listen to his, if he's replying back. I've done that as well. This is what it says.
Tell him enough about your own drinking habits, symptoms and experiences to encourage him to speak of himself. If he wishes to talk, let him do so. You will thus get a better idea of how you ought to proceed. If he is not communicative, give him a sketch of your own drinking career up to the time you quit, but say nothing for the moment of how that was accomplished. If he's in a serious mood, dwell on the troubles liquor has caused you, being careful not to moralise or lecture. If his mood is light, tell him numerous stories of your escapades. Get him to tell some of his.
It's interesting. I'm not trying to convince that other person that he's an alcoholic. What I'm trying to do is convince that other person that I'm an alcoholic. Okay? And then see whether that person identifies. I always start talking about the craving. This is the first thing that most people identify with. And I can identify with this aspect of the illness long before I had all sorts of other problems. Whenever I started drinking, it would go out of control. I'd start with the intention of only having one or two, but then I'd keep going. I get the taste for it. One's too many and a thousand's not enough. Once I start drinking, I don't want to stop. And I even tell a particular story about not having a drink, of being in a situation with work colleagues and stuff, other people are drinking, and I know after lunch I'm going to have to go back to work and I don't have a drink because I know if I start drinking, I'm going to have to keep going and I won't want to work. So even those sort of stories about putting off the drink, another alcoholic will start identifying with that, about the way that we behave around those things, knowing that when I start, I can't control it like other people can. So I need to share about this with examples from my own experience, not examples from the big book or anywhere else, examples from my own experience. And so tell your story of your relationship with alcohol, and also listen if that person is sharing some of their experiences. Because when I listen to what they're saying, I can pick out the parts of my story that most relate to that person. Then it says to start to describe alcoholism as an illness.
When he sees you know all about the drinking game, commence to describe yourself as an alcoholic. Tell him how baffled you were, how you finally learned that you were sick. Give him an account of the struggles you made to stop. Show him the mental twist which leads to the first drink of a spree. We suggest you do this as we have done it in the chapter on alcoholism. If he is alcoholic, he will understand you at once. He will match your mental inconsistencies with some of his own.
That's an interesting thing, that an alcoholic identifies really quickly in a lot of cases. I remember going into these places, into a detox, and thinking, oh, how am I going to make a connection with another alcoholic? And you go in there, and sometimes the staff in the detox turn the television off, and they were watching it, and they get sit there and they, oh, who's these people coming from AA? They want to tell us what to do, and they don't want to listen to you. But instead of telling them what to do, I just sit down and start sharing my story. Then you see that alcoholic sitting there, and they might not say anything, but they start leaning forward and listening, and they go, gee, that's happened to me. And you get that interest from another alcoholic, and you go, I've made that connection again because I'm talking about my drinking and how it affected me and the problems that it's caused. So it says to start talking about it as an illness. And so this is an important thing. This craving I get is an abnormal reaction to alcohol. I have this allergy to alcohol which causes my drinking to go out of control. I use my own words and my own description of that. And because my drinking is out of control, I start getting other problems. So we start talking about the problems caused by my drinking. Because my drinking is out of control, I'm making bad decisions, I'm getting relationship problems, because I'm lying to people about my drinking, I'm breaking promises and letting people down. I'm getting employment problems because I'm not showing up to work and things like that. It's starting to affect my health and legal problems. So that's what I start talking about, because my drinking is out of control. It's best not to dwell on the reasons we drank, because the person has already got lots of reasons why they drank. We emphasize the reasons why we needed to stop. Sometimes in a detox, I know this happens quite often, we give a talk about AA and share our stories, and afterwards we say, oh, you got any questions? Has anyone been to any meetings before? And sometimes people say, I went to a meeting and all they talked about was their problems, and I left the meeting wanting to drink. Okay, and that's because people are actually talking about, oh, I drank because of this, I drank because of my childhood, I drank because I was bored, I drank because my job was stressful, I drank because I liked it, I drank because... And that's not very useful. What's really useful is I needed to stop because my wife was going to leave if I didn't. I needed to stop because if I was going to lose my job if I didn't. I can tell this story. I get to a point where I make a decision that I'm going to stop. I'll give up drinking. And this is this really smart idea. In fact, it's a very sane idea. If every time I start drinking it goes out of control, the smart thing to do, the sane thing to do is don't pick up the first drink. But then the question is, then can I stay stopped? And that's when I found out in AA, and I identified when people talked about this obsession. I'd want to stop drinking, but the thought of a drink would keep on coming back and coming back. Even after I've stopped for a while, the thoughts of drinking would keep returning. And I would keep on doing this insane thing of picking up again. Then in the book it suggests we now start talking about the hopelessness. We go an extra stage past that. We're talking about being an illness, and now we lead further into it and start talking about the hopelessness of alcoholism.
If you are satisfied that he is a real alcoholic, begin to dwell on the hopeless feature of the malady. Show him from your own experience how the queer mental condition surrounding that first drink prevents normal functioning of the willpower. Don't at this stage refer to this book unless he has seen it and wishes to discuss it. And be careful not to brand him as an alcoholic. Let him draw his own conclusion. If he sticks to the idea that he can still control his drinking, tell him that possibly he can, if he is not too alcoholic. But insist that if he is severely afflicted, there may be little chance he can recover by himself.
Once again, there's a point here where we might stop. If you are satisfied that he's a real alcoholic, then we go further. If the person's not identifying with you and understanding what you're talking about when you're talking about the craving and the obsession, that might be as far as we go at that point. But if he is, then we can go to the next part and talk about that. Once again, it's not about convincing the other person that he's an alcoholic. It's about showing the person that I'm an alcoholic. So I can put these two things together, the craving and the obsession. Because of the obsession, that thought of a drink keeps on coming back and coming back and coming back. And then I pick it up, and when I pick it up, it kicked off the craving and goes out of control. And when it's out of control, I get all these problems in life. I'm lying about it, I'm covering up, I'm late for work, I'm losing friends and losing relationships. And then I make a decision to stop. And whenever I stop drinking, life tends to get better. But at the same time, I have this obsession. That thought of a drink keeps on coming back and coming back. And I resist it and I resist it. And I use all the tools that I have, really powerful tools like my will. I have a strong willpower. And now I have this knowledge about I'm an alcoholic. And also the fear of what's going to happen if I start drinking again. And I resist it and I resist it. And then one day, there's this strange mental lapse. And I forget about all those bad things that used to happen when I was drinking. And I have no defense against that, and I pick it up, and when I pick it up, it sets off the craving, and when the craving kicks in, it goes out of control, and I have all those problems come back into my life, and then I stop again, but the obsession's still there, and I resist it, and I resist it, and then one day there's that little mental lapse, there's that day where I forget about how bad things were, and I pick it up again, it sets off the craving, and round we go. And this is really introducing this hopeless cycle, the alcoholic cycle. So we talk about that hopelessness. We stop here if he's not identifying, but take that further.
Continue to speak of alcoholism as an illness, a fatal malady. Talk about the conditions of body and mind which accompany it. Keep his attention focused mainly on your personal experience. Explain that many are doomed who never realise their predicament. Doctors are rightly loath to tell alcoholic patients the whole story unless it will serve some good purpose. But you may talk to him about the hopelessness of alcoholism because you offer a solution. You will soon have your friend admitting he has many, if not all, of the traits of the alcoholic. If his own doctor is willing to tell him that he is alcoholic, so much the better.
It's great advice here. It's just amazing. The value I got from rereading it is that it doesn't always go the way of the script, okay? It very rarely goes exactly the way that's in the book, okay? Each situation is a bit different. But because I've reread this book over and over, we can adjust it, but apply the same principles. You may not get exactly the same thing happening, but I understand what the principles are of carrying this message. And the message really has two parts. First of all, it's a message of hopelessness of the disease, but then the other part of the message is a message of hope, and we'll be getting into that next. So there's that hopelessness, that hopeless cycle, and because of the craving, I'm powerless after the first drink, and because of the obsession, I'm powerless before the first drink, and I'm powerless over alcohol, and it makes my life unmanageable. And over time it gets worse, and I can share that from my own experience that it's a progressive disease. Now it's interesting, fairly recently, a guy still got a job and a wife and family, but getting in trouble. Now I could go and tell him a story about multiple detoxes and hospitalisations and stuff, but he's not going to identify with that. I tell that part of the story before my wife had left, okay? Because that's what's about to happen to him, okay? I put myself in his position and talk about what my drinking was like. I was powerless then. I really desperately wanted to stop drinking, but I couldn't stop and stay stopped, and that's why my wife left. That's why I lost my job. So talk about the hopelessness, and then we get to the point 7. If he asks, we now tell him how we got well.
Even though your protege may not have entirely admitted his condition, he's become very curious to know how you got well. Let him ask you that question if he will. Tell him exactly what happened to you. Stress the spiritual feature freely.
It's interesting, sometimes we don't even get to this point. Okay, you're talking about the disease and the person identifies up to a certain point, and they often find it really useful, the disease concept and the craving, and they go, yeah, identify with that, but I'm not crazy enough to go round and round that cycle. And that's great, okay? If they think to themselves, okay, now that I have this information, I don't want to get as bad as that guy David from AA, so thanks very much. And they don't even bother asking why, how you got well. They really think that they can do it themselves, and this extra piece of information that we've given them is actually very helpful. It gives them more reason to want to stop. And in some cases, that actually works. I've had circumstances of a friend of the family, a guy came round, I spoke to him about this, he was very young, I actually took him to a couple of meetings, and he said, thanks very much, I'm glad I know that, it looks as though I'm identifying with parts of this, so I better stop drinking. A year later, he didn't go to any more meetings, but he stopped drinking, and I got a message thanking me for what we'd done. Now, I count that as a success. This guy has stayed sober. He found out about the craving, identified with that, and at that point, he hadn't gone any further. He wasn't powerless. He was able to stop and stay stopped on his own. Now, I hope he never has a drink for the rest of his life, and maybe he will. Maybe he can have a happy and successful life. I sort of also know that if in 10 years' time, he forgets about all of that, his life is going really well because he's not drinking, and he gives it a try again, and if at that point he finds he's not able to stop and stay stopped again, he'll have in the back of his mind, I can always go back to AA, because that seed has been planted. So that's successful. That's success for AA. If someone comes to AA to a few meetings and stops drinking on their own, that's fantastic. That's actually wonderful. But if they're identifying and saying, oh, I'm identifying with this thing that I can't stop and stay stopped on my own, and they're looking at you going, oh, you're looking all right, how come you're sober? And they ask the question, so how did you get sober? And it says, tell them exactly what happened to you. Stress the spiritual feature freely. So stop here if he doesn't ask, but if he does, we go on. Tell your story. Again, it's about tell your story. The whole thing is about tell your story, your personal story. This is where we give the person hope. Up until now, we've been talking about the hopelessness. Now we're talking about hope, the second part of the message. What's the message from AA? Some people think, oh, it's the message of the 12 steps. In fact, the message is actually there in the book. It says the message describes as the ABCs. A, that we're alcoholic and couldn't manage our own lives. B, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. But C, God could and it would if he was sought. That's the actual message. The steps themselves aren't the message. They're the method of seeking that power greater than ourselves. That's the deliverables. Okay? So at this point, we can and should talk about the spiritual nature of the AA program. Then it says, point 8, emphasise that he should choose his own concept of God.
If the man be agnostic or atheist, make it emphatic that he does not have to agree with your own concept of God. He can choose any conception he likes, provided it makes sense to him. The main thing is that he be willing to believe in a power greater than himself, and he live by spiritual principles. This
was a great relief to me. I identify with people in AA and I go, great, they've got something I want. And then they say, we've got a spiritual program, and my prejudice jumps up and says no. And then AA turns around and says, but you get to choose your own conception of what this higher power is. That refers back to that meeting with Bill Wilson when Ebby had got sober with a religious group, the Oxford group, and came to see Bill. And Bill was worried that Ebby was trying to tell him what to believe. And Ebby didn't. He said, why don't you choose your own conception of God? And that's what gets Bill over the line with his second step, is that no one was going to pressure him to believe a particular thing. Next thing is tell the person about the program and why you are trying to help. This is what it says.
Outline the program of action, explaining how you made a self-appraisal, how you straightened out your past, and why you are now endeavouring to be helpful to him. It is important for him to realise that your attempt to pass this on to him plays a vital part in your recovery.
Again, if we've got to a point where the person is actually asking, how does it work? Okay, then we tell them. Again, from our own experience. It's about tell your story. So I can talk about the program. I don't need to talk about each individual step and the whole process. I'm not trying to teach the person how to do it, but I'm sharing my own experience of this process. I finally admitted I couldn't get sober on my own. There you go, that's my first step. I met alcoholics in AA who'd recovered. That gave me some hope, and I started to think the AA program would help me as well. And then I made a decision to take this spiritual path, and I'd made a commitment to go on with the rest of the program and try AA's way of doing it. That's my personal experience. This is what happened to me when I came to AA. And then I had to do some stuff, the things that they suggested to me. I had to have a good look at my past, my actions and my motives and the mistakes I've made in steps 4 and 5. And I had to become willing to change and ask for help. So that's steps 6 and 7. And then wherever I could, I tried to clean up the past and repair the damage I've done to other people in steps 8 and 9. And now, after being through that, I now continue to try and live a spiritual life through daily meditation and reflection. And of course, I'm sober. I'm sober through this program, and I stay sober by trying to pass this message on to you and to other people who might want to stop drinking. There you go. There's my little quick run through of my experience using my own words of going through the 12-step program and how it changed me. Important thing here is about passing this on as part of my program for staying sober. So once again, it's about tell your story, share my own experience.
Actually, he may be helping you more than you are helping him. Make it plain he is under no obligation to you, that you hope only that he will try to help other alcoholics when he escapes his own difficulties.
I always try to make sure that I do this. When I'm talking to someone new, I'm doing this because it's part of my program to stay sober. I hope you get well. And that's the other part about AA. That's the deal, isn't it? Okay, I'm passing this on. We're not going to ask you for any money. We're not going to even ask you for your full name or any commitment or anything like that. But if we do help, all we're going to ask is that once you're sober, you try and help the next person.
Suggest how important it is that he place the welfare of other people ahead of his own.
So right from the get-go, we're introducing these spiritual values about being unselfish.
Be kind to your partner.
That's right, that's right. Good advice. Good advice for that person looking for some help. The wife is pulling their hair out and all that type of stuff, causing all sorts of problems. A great piece of advice. What do I do in the meantime? Just be kind to your family and the people around you.
Make it clear that he is not under pressure, that he needn't see you again if he doesn't want to. You should not be offended if he wants to call it off, for he has helped you more than you have helped him. If your talk has been sane, quiet and full of human understanding, you've perhaps made a friend. Maybe you have disturbed him about the question of alcoholism. This is all to the good. The more hopeless he feels, the better. He will be more likely to follow your suggestions.
Like that, I heard someone saying, we're here to comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. Okay, so there's that. Once again, there's two parts of the message. One is this message of hopelessness. This is a deadly disease we're dealing with, and the second part of the message is that there is a solution to it. Okay? There's a spiritual way out of it. So tell them about the program and why you are trying to help. That's important. Again, it's about tell your story. Then tell him about the fellowship and literature, is what it says.
On your first visit, tell him about the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. If he shows interest, lend him your copy of the book.
Yeah. Up to this point, it actually says, don't mention this book. It actually says that before. We don't mention the book until we get to this point, and then we're about to leave, and we can say, here you go. More information here. You want to go to an AA meeting, there's AA meetings around, might talk about those a bit, but give the person a copy of the book, because that's where the message is. So then, point 11, leave it up to him and to a higher power.
Unless your friend wants to talk further about himself, do not wear out your welcome. Give him a chance to think it over. Offer him friendship and fellowship. Tell him that if he wants to get well, you will do anything to help. That
friendship and fellowship is really important. Because if the person is not quite at the point where they're ready to commit to the whole program, at least that friendship is really important, that they know where there's some way to go. And it might be tomorrow, it might be next week, it mightn't be for another 5 years, but we've planted the seed. Not only that, but we've wrecked their drinking. I know a friend of mine in AA, one of his bosses said to him, we've got a bunch of people over in this particular branch and they're drinking too much. He knew the guy was in AA. He said, can you come and convince them to cut down their drinking or stop their drinking? And the member said, no, I can't make them stop, but I can wreck their drinking. I can tell them what alcoholism is. Yeah, in some cases, it's planting the seed. In some cases, you'll meet a person and they'll say, let's go. Oh, this is amazing. And we get that amazing amount of hope. And the reactions we get can vary. And the book actually lists 3 different possibilities. Here's one.
If he is not interested in your solution, if he expects you to act only as a banker for his financial difficulties or a nurse for his sprees, you may have to drop him until he changes his mind. This he may do after he gets hurt some more.
I had a guy come out of a detox. I'd been to see him in a detox. He was really keen. Will you take me to meetings? I started picking him up, taking him to meetings and helping him out. And then I knew there was something wrong because every time he got in my car, he would change the radio channel over to a country and western thing. And I thought, that's not right. But then he was buying smokes from me. And I was happy to do that to start with. And then he started saying, well, I need some furniture moved. Can you drive to Ballarat and help me move some furniture? I'm going, no, I'm here to help you recover, okay? I can help to a certain extent, but it became really obvious that the person really wasn't interested in the meetings or in recovery. He was interested in someone helping him out financially in a lot of ways. There's another reaction we might get. This is the second type.
If he is sincerely interested and wants to see you again, ask him to read this book in the interval. After doing that, he must decide for himself whether he wants to go on. He should not be pushed or prodded by you, his wife, or his friends. If he is to find God, the desire must come from within.
I like to give the book to the person and say, there you go, read this book, right? Because the book is hopefully going to back up the things I've been saying. And you can read other people's stories. And it emphasises what we've been emphasising today. It talks about alcoholism for the first few chapters and then explains what the program is. I also like the point about he should not be pushed or prodded by you or anybody else. It's not about pushing. We've got to a point, we've laid out the problem, we've also laid out the solution, and we leave it up to that other person. This also applies with sponsoring later on. Then there's another type.
If he thinks he can do the job in some other way or prefers some other spiritual approach, encourage him to follow his own conscience. We have no monopoly on God. We merely have an approach that worked with us. But point out that we alcoholics have much in common and that you would like, in any case, to be friendly, and let it go at that.
I like this too. It's not about saying AA is the only way and if you don't come to AA you won't get sober, because some people do get sober without AA. Sometimes you hear people say AA doesn't work for everyone, but the point is not everyone who wants to stop drinking needs AA. Some people can find other ways of doing it. But even so, coming to a few AA meetings or getting an idea of what AA is about is still helpful to someone else. And if that person says, I agree with what you're doing, but I've got a different spiritual path. A good friend of mine went through the same detox as me a couple of months after me. And I can remember this, he told me about a conversation he'd had. He'd been to a big AA convention, and afterwards, on the way home, the taxi driver said, where have you been? And he said, I've been to this AA meeting and I've been sober for 2 years. And the taxi driver said, I've been sober for 2 years too. I don't know what AA is, but 2 years ago, I decided to go back to the faith that I was brought up. Right? And that's what he did. He actually went back to the mosque and re-energized his spiritual life and got sober. And Les would always tell me about this conversation he had with this other guy who had a spiritual experience, found a spiritual path outside of AA and got sober, and they were comparing how similar their journeys were.
Yeah.
We have no monopoly on God, but we do have a way that we know works for alcoholics from all sorts of backgrounds. Point out, we like to be friendly. We still like to be friendly, and leave it at that. So stop here if he's not interested in our solution. Encourage the person if they think they can do it another way. Encourage them to try that. Okay? But also leave the door open. If it doesn't work, we're here to help. Be friendly. Then follow up and give practical advice.
Suppose now you are making your second visit to a man. He has read this volume and says he is prepared to go through with the 12 steps of the program of recovery. Having had the experience yourself, you can give him much practical advice. Let him know you are available if he wishes to make a decision and tell his story. But do not insist upon it if he prefers to consult someone else.
Here we go. This doesn't happen all that often.
No.
You have the second visit, right? We're ready to go, make that third step decision. But at this point, this is where sponsorship comes in, where someone's ready to make that decision and needs some guidance through the rest of the thing. So look, to me, carrying the message is like selling the car. Sponsorship is more like teaching someone how to drive, okay? We don't start with teaching someone how to drive. The first thing we do is carry the message of the hopelessness of the disease and the hope that's in the program. The details come later once the person has made that decision. So there it is. As I said, there's a lot of detail and a lot of suggestions in there, but also a lot of caveats about if you get this far and the person's not interested or is not identifying, we stop here. It's never going to go exactly to script. But I also know this same process applies in lots of other circumstances. When I'm talking to a newcomer after a meeting, when I'm talking to someone in a detox, when you're talking to a group, you usually can't go too far into the program because we're trying to find the common ground for a group of people. But every opportunity I get to carry the message is gold to me. It really is. Just at the beginning of COVID, when AA went online on Zoom, I was asked to be interviewed on radio in Melbourne, Sammy J. And they wanted to ask about AA and how AA moved on to Zoom, because that's a really interesting story. And so I was interviewed about that, about how AA moved on to Zoom during lockdown. But I also made sure that I got in enough of my story. So that if there were any alcoholics listening, they would have heard about the craving. They would have heard about that obsession and that inability to stop drinking. And the AA friend who got me the interview in the first place said to me, there you go, I knew you'd do that. They weren't asking about that, but you put in a 12-step thing there anyway. These principles that I learned through reading this chapter, and more than that, by practice, by doing it and doing it. We make lots of mistakes. Now, I've made lots of mistakes. That's how we learn to do it. I can remember a guy I worked with in Ballarat, and I was 3 or 4 years sober, and he was asking me, why do you go to AA? And I told him this big story about I'd lost a wife and family, and I was multiple detoxes, almost died. I was in a psych hospital, and told him this huge story about the catastrophe my life was, and that's why I had to go to AA. And at the end of it, he just turned and looked at me and said, oh, my problem is just that when I start drinking, I can't stop. And I suddenly realised that I'd done the wrong thing, okay? Because here I am catastrophising the whole thing, and he's saying now an alcoholic is like that, where really when I had started just talking about the craving, the thing that he identified with, I might have been able to carry a message, but I sort of killed that chance, I think through my own ego actually, wanting to catastrophise. So we make mistakes, but the more we do it, the more joy we get from it. You know, we repair the mistakes, we stay friendly with people. Just want to point out one little bit here about this spiritual awakening and refer to that, the spiritual awakening that's referred to in step 12. This is what it says in the book.
The great fact is just this, and nothing less, that we have had deep and effective spiritual experiences, which have revolutionised our whole attitude toward life, toward our fellows, and toward God's universe.
See, that's that promise from step 2, that we can be restored to sanity. It talked about back in the other chapter, we agnostics. We've had a revolutionary change in our way of living and thinking. And by this time, that's what's come about. That reference refers to the back of the book, the appendix. This is part of what it says about this spiritual awakening that we get.
Quite often, friends of the newcomer are aware of the difference long before he is himself. He finally realises that he has undergone a profound alteration in his reaction to life, that such change could hardly have been brought about by himself alone. What often takes place in a few months could seldom have been accomplished by years of self-discipline. With few exceptions, our members find that they have tapped an unsuspected inner resource, which are presently identified with their own conception of a power greater than themselves.
I like that, yeah, that we identify that change, we've tapped into this inner resource, which we then identify that came from whatever my concept of a power greater than myself is. So I always wanted to know when I was first around and reading this step, what's this spiritual awakening all about? Particularly if there's someone like me with a sort of an agnostic or atheist bent. What's this spiritual awakening about? I get to this point and I know what's been awakened in me. It's compassion for the next alcoholic. I know what it's like to suffer from this disease, but I also know what it's like to be recovered. And I have this compassion and I really want to help carry that message. And it's what keeps me sober long term. Just want to mention the very last prayer in the whole of the book. The very last chapter, A Vision for You, just at the end, there's one last prayer in the book. There's prayers all the way through that refers to step 12. And this, if step 12 was the most powerful step of all, this has got to be the most powerful prayer of all.
Ask him in your morning meditation what you can do each day for the man who's still sick. The answers will come if your own house is in order.
And that's my experience. Things happen in life, good things, bad things, all sorts of things. I would ring up my sponsor and say, things are going really well. He'd say, you know how to keep that? Go and help someone else. Or I'd say, things are going really bad, I'm in trouble at work or whatever. And he'd say, you know how to get out of that? Go and help someone else. He never said to me, go and do another inventory. He said, you know what the problem is. The underlying problem I discovered through those housecleaning steps is selfishness. And this is what gets me out of selfishness, looking to help the next person.
Thanks, David. And thanks everyone for being here. The thing that I really get from this 12th step is my story, my experience, and my story is the most powerful thing I have. It is the thing that can help somebody else find a light, to stop drinking, to get on with life sober. Never set it aside. It is the most powerful thing. And I'm the expert at it because I lived it. And that's why it's so powerful. But thank you everyone who has stuck with us for the 7 weeks this time round. And this helps us. If you've got anything out of it, that's fantastic. But we do this because it keeps us sober long term. And that's where I want to stay.